My name is Marissa Chen. I'm 36 years old, and until 6 months ago, I believed I was in a strong, unbreakable marriage. I believed that because for 12 years, I had built it brick by brick with patience, compromise, and the quiet faith that when two people choose each other every day, loyalty becomes automatic. I was wrong. I didn't know my life was already collapsing the night my husband introduced me as his roommate. Not wife, not partner, roommate. The word didn't just sting, it erased me. I remember standing there in the middle of that elegant ballroom, surrounded by polished executives and crystal chandeliers, my smile frozen in place while my heart slammed violently against my ribs. I remember the way my husband's hand rested too casually on another woman's lower back. The way she laughed, comfortable, intimate, like she belonged there with him. And the way he didn't correct himself. That single word confirmed every doubt I had tried to bury for months. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't confront him. I did what I've always done when something feels structurally unsound. I observed. I went home that night and kissed him goodnight like nothing had happened. Then I locked myself in the guest bathroom and threw up until my throat burned and my hands shook so badly I had to sit on the cold tile floor to steady myself. By morning, I had made a decision. If my marriage was being dismantled behind my back, I would understand how. If my trust was being weaponized against me, I would learn why. And if this was going to end, because something deep inside me already knew it would not end with confusion, humiliation, or silence. It would end with truth. I didn't know yet that what I was uncovering wasn't just an affair. It was strategy, power, corporate protection, and a betrayal so calculated it would threaten not only my marriage, but my career, my reputation, and everything I had spent my adult life building. I am an architect by profession. I design structures meant to last. And when something fails, I don't look away. I study the cracks. I was 24 when I met Evan Chen. We were both graduate students then, young, driven, slightly arrogant in the way people are when they believe ambition alone can outrun reality. Evan studied sustainable architecture, already talking about green restoration projects and urban renewal as if the world were waiting for him. I was in marketing, obsessed with brand strategy, analytics, and the idea that the right story, told the right way, could move markets. We met in a campus study lounge late one night, both of us surviving on bad coffee and big dreams. He asked to borrow a charger. I teased him for forgetting something so basic. He smiled like he'd already decided he liked me. From the beginning, we felt aligned, not just romantically, but directionally. We married young, maybe too young, some people said, but we didn't care. We believed struggle would bond us. We believed that if we worked hard enough, we could grow together. The early years were not glamorous. Evan launched his architecture firm from our garage. Literally. Folding table, secondhand printer, rolled up blueprints stacked against the wall like fragile promises. I was working long hours at Patterson Global, slowly climbing the marketing ladder. My salary paid the mortgage, the utilities, the groceries. His income was unpredictable, some months non-existent, but I never resented it. We were a team. I remember nights when we stayed up past midnight, me reviewing pitch decks while he revised structural plans. Both of us too tired to talk, but comforted just by sharing the same space. We ate instant noodles more times than I can count. We celebrated tiny wins like they were championships. His first signed contract, my first promotion. I believed in him. Completely. By our mid-30s, the payoff finally came. Evan's firm began gaining recognition for its restoration work. Historic buildings reborn without losing their soul. My own career had surged. I became a senior marketing director at Patterson Global, managing international campaigns, sitting in boardrooms I'd once only read about. To outsiders, we look like a power couple, but success doesn't always arrive evenly. I was already an executive while Evan was still fighting for expansion. I told myself that imbalance didn't matter, that love wasn't a competition, that support didn't need symmetry. Looking back now, I see the first hairline fractures. Evan grew quieter about my work, less curious. He stopped asking about my meetings. When I talked about strategy or leadership dynamics, his eyes glazed over. Not with boredom, but something closer to discomfort. Around that time, Camilla Walsh joined Patterson as Chief Operating Officer, transferred from London. Evan barely registered the name when I mentioned it casually. To him, it was just another corporate reshuffle. To me, Camilla represented authority in my world, polished, decisive, someone the executive team listened to. She praised my work publicly, included me in high-level discussions. When I received a promotion shortly after her arrival, Evan congratulated me. But something in his smile felt delayed. I told myself I was imagining it. After 12 years of marriage, you don't want to believe the person beside you is slowly stepping away. So I ignored the subtle shifts, the longer hours. The phone turned face down. The conversations reduced to logistics, schedules, errands, deadlines. I told myself this was adulthood. That closeness naturally softened over time. I didn't know I was already being edged out of my own marriage. The changes didn't arrive all at once. They seeped in quietly, disguised as ambition, fatigue, and the kind of professional pressure people admire from the outside. At first, it was Evan's schedule. He began working later, claiming deadlines, client revisions, site visits that ran long. That wasn't unusual. Architecture had always demanded flexibility, but the way he worked changed. His phone never left his hand. When I walked into a room, he would tilt the screen away instinctively, as if shielding something private. When I asked how his day had been, the answers grew vague. Busy. Same stuff. Nothing interesting. Conversations that once wandered, dreams, frustrations, plans, collapsed into transactional exchanges. Who was picking up groceries, what time we needed to leave, whether a bill had been paid. At the same time, Evan began discouraging me from attending company events. "They're boring," he said lightly one evening. "Just corporate small talk." "You'd hate it." That should have surprised me. He used to love hearing about my professional world. Now it felt like he was fencing me out of his. I noticed other things too. He changed his cologne, something sharper, unfamiliar. Started going to the gym at odd hours, usually late at night, claiming it helped him clear his head. When I suggested working out together like we used to, he brushed it off. "You don't need that," he said. "You're already fine." The words sounded like a compliment, but they landed strangely hollow. Meanwhile, Camilla Walsh became a more frequent name in our household. Always professionally. Always casually. Camilla wants this campaign repositioned. Camilla thinks the board will like this angle. Camilla asked me to sit in on another strategy call. Evan never reacted, never asked follow-up questions, almost as if he'd trained himself not to. The distance between us wasn't explosive, it was suffocating. A slow vacuum where intimacy used to live. I began replaying moments from our past, searching for reassurance. Hadn't we survived worse? Financial stress, career uncertainty, years of grinding without recognition. Why did this feel different? I tried to reconnect. Planned dinners, weekend getaways, even suggested couples counseling, framing it as proactive, not reactive. Evan laughed it off gently. "Nothing's wrong, Marissa," he said. "We're just busy adults now." Busy adults don't stop looking at each other. Busy adults don't flinch when their spouse touches their arm. Busy adults don't feel like strangers sharing a house. I started waking up before him, watching his face while he slept, trying to recognize the man I'd married. Sometimes I could. Other times, he looked like someone passing through my life temporarily. The doubt gnawed at me, but I kept it contained. I told myself suspicion was a form of betrayal too. I didn't know that while I was trying to preserve our marriage, someone else was already rewriting the rules, and that soon I'd be forced to see it with my own eyes. The night I finally insisted on attending the company mixer felt insignificant at first. Just one event. One evening I refused to miss after years of absence. When I told Evan I'd cleared my schedule, his reaction was wrong. Not angry, not annoyed, nervous. "You don't have to come," he said too quickly. "It's really nothing special." "I want to see your world," I replied, "just this once." He tried again, softer this time. "You'll be bored. Everyone just talks business." I smiled, already sensing something beneath his words. "I talk business for a living." That should have ended it. Instead, the tension lingered. The venue was upscale. Polished marble floors, warm lighting, champagne flutes catching reflections from crystal chandeliers. Executives clustered in confident circles, laughter floating effortlessly through the room. I arrived early, wearing my best dress, feeling strangely hopeful. I wanted to remember what it felt like to stand beside my husband proudly, not just functionally. I spotted Evan near the bar. He was laughing. Not the polite, professional laugh I knew, but the relaxed, intimate one he used to reserve for me. His hand rested on a woman's lower back, too comfortably, too familiarly. The woman leaned into him, her body angled as if she belonged there. Her smile was effortless, possessive. I didn't need to rush closer to understand. Still, I did. As I approached, Evan's expression shifted rapidly. Shock, then panic, then a forced brightness that made my stomach drop. "Marissa," he said too loudly. "What a surprise!" The woman turned, eyes assessing me quickly, before settling into a practiced smile. "This is Camilla Walsh," Evan continued smoothly, "our COO." Camilla extended her hand confidently, unfazed. "Nice to meet you." Then Evan added, casually, disastrously, "This is Marissa, my roommate." The word hit me physically. Roommate. Not wife, not partner, not even spouse. Roommate. I felt my breath stall in my chest as the surrounding conversations dipped into awkward silence. A few executives exchanged glances. Someone cleared their throat. I shook Camilla's hand anyway. I smiled. I did not give them the reaction they expected. The rest of the evening passed like a performance I somehow nailed without rehearsing. I engaged Evan's colleagues in thoughtful conversation, asked intelligent questions, laughed at the right moments, complimented projects I genuinely admired. No one would have guessed I was unraveling from the inside out. That single word replayed in my mind over and over. Roommate. At home, Evan acted as if nothing had happened. He chatted about the event, commented on the food, mentioned how surprised he was that I'd come. He never acknowledged how he'd introduced me. I didn't confront him. I kissed him goodnight, waited until the bedroom door closed, then locked myself in the guest bathroom and vomited until my throat burned and tears blurred my vision. That night, something shifted permanently. Trust doesn't always shatter loudly. Sometimes it dissolves. And once it does, there is no rebuilding without truth. The next morning, I began watching. The days after the mixer passed in a strange, suspended quiet. Evan moved through the house like everything was normal. He made coffee in the mornings, asked about my meetings, kissed my cheek before leaving. The same gestures we'd shared for years. Except now, each one felt rehearsed. I replayed that moment over and over. Roommate. I tried to convince myself there was some explanation, a misunderstanding, a joke that landed wrong. Maybe he panicked. Maybe he didn't want to mix personal labels into his corporate life. But explanations require honesty, and honesty was suddenly missing. I didn't explode. I didn't demand answers. I did what shock often forces you to do. I turned inward. I asked myself brutal questions. Had I pushed him away without realizing it? Had my career made him feel smaller? Had I stopped seeing him the way he needed to be seen? I examined every memory, every choice, trying to locate the moment where I'd failed so badly that my husband no longer claimed me. One evening, I tried a careful confrontation. Not accusatory, not emotional, just open. "Hey," I said quietly while we were clearing dishes, "can I ask you something about the mixer?" He didn't look at me immediately. "Sure." "When you introduced me," I continued, keeping my voice steady, "you called me your roommate." A pause, long enough to feel intentional. "Oh," he said lightly, "that. I didn't think you'd care." "Care?" "I'm your wife," I replied. "I thought maybe you misspoke." He shrugged. It didn't seem relevant in that setting. My stomach tightened. Why wouldn't it be relevant? Marissa, he sighed, as if I were being unreasonable. It's work. Titles complicate things. I searched his face for guilt, for embarrassment, for anything that suggested he understood the damage he'd caused. I found none. Instead, there was irritation, subtle but unmistakable. You're reading too much into it, he added. You always do that when you're stressed. There it was. The first hint of something darker, a gentle dismissal, a quiet reframing of my hurt as overreaction. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. That night, lying beside him in the dark, I realized something terrifying. I didn't feel angry. I felt alert, like a part of me had woken up after months of sleep. I began noticing patterns instead of excuses, timelines instead of stories, inconsistencies that no longer felt accidental. And with that awareness came a decision I wasn't proud of, but felt was necessary. If Evan was living a double life, I needed proof. Not suspicion, not intuition, evidence. The kind that doesn't disappear when someone tells you you're imagining things. The architect in me understood this instinctively. Before you confront a structural failure, you study the load-bearing points. You gather data. And then, only then, you act. Once I stopped trusting explanations, the world sharpened. Details I had ignored before began aligning with unsettling clarity. Evan's routines grew predictable in their secrecy. Late meetings that always ran over. Client dinners that never produced names or receipts. Work trips that coincidentally matched Camilla Walsh's travel schedule. Something I only noticed after checking public company calendars. When I asked questions, Evan didn't reassure me. He deflected. You're interrogating me now? Why are you suddenly so suspicious? I thought you trusted me. Each response carried the same implication. The problem wasn't his behavior, it was my perception. That realization hurt more than the suspicion itself. Around this time, his family began drifting closer into our space. His mother called more often. His sister asked casual but pointed questions about my workload, my stress levels, whether I was handling things okay. The concern sounded caring on the surface, but beneath it was judgment. You've always been intense, his mother said once, gently but firmly. Men don't always know how to handle that. I wondered what version of me Evan had been presenting to them. Meanwhile, small things started going wrong in my professional life. A client postponed a meeting citing concerns. An industry forum suddenly hosted negative comments questioning my stability and leadership. A colleague pulled me aside and asked, carefully, if everything was all right at home. The message was being planted. I was unraveling. I was paranoid. I was unstable. Gaslighting doesn't begin with denial. It begins with narrative, and someone was actively shaping mine. I stopped confronting Evan entirely. Instead, I documented every late arrival, every contradictory excuse, every moment where his words didn't match reality. I leaned on Leo, an old college friend who now worked in corporate security, not asking him to spy, but to help me understand patterns. With his guidance, I learned how to protect information, how to observe without alerting. Within weeks, the truth crystallized. The messages, the meetups, the secrecy. Evan wasn't just cheating. He was coordinating. And Camilla Walsh wasn't just a lover. She was a superior with power, influence, and a spotless corporate image that couldn't survive scandal. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just personal betrayal. It was professional exposure, ethical violations, retaliation, and calculated risk management. When I confronted Evan again, this time carefully, indirectly, he lashed out. You're obsessed. That was the moment I understood. He wasn't afraid of losing me. He was afraid of being exposed. And if protecting himself meant destroying my credibility, he was already halfway there. Something hardened inside me. I had spent my career navigating executive power structures. I understood hierarchy. I understood leverage. And I understood this. If I didn't move carefully, I wouldn't just lose my marriage. I would lose my reputation, my career, and my voice. So I stopped. reacting. I started planning. The breaking point didn't arrive with shouting or slammed doors. It arrived quietly. One night, Evan didn't come home. No call, no text, no explanation. I sat alone at the kitchen island long after midnight, the overhead light too bright, my phone face up on the counter like an accusation. Every sound from the street made my heart jump. Every minute that passed felt heavier than the last. By 2:17 a.m., I knew. Not because I had proof in that moment, but because hope had finally exhausted itself. When Evan walked in just before dawn, his shirt wrinkled, his cologne unfamiliar and sharp, he didn't apologize. "You fell asleep," he said flatly. "I didn't want to wake you." I looked at him and realized something devastating. I didn't recognize the man standing in front of me. This wasn't the partner who had shared instant noodles with me on the garage floor. This wasn't the man who once stayed up all night helping me rehearse a pitch he barely understood just because it mattered to me. This was someone else, and I was alone with him. The loneliness was worse than the betrayal, because betrayal implies connection. Loneliness is what happens when that connection dies quietly and leaves you sitting in its place. Over the following days, the pressure intensified. Friends grew distant. Conversations became careful. Evan's family stopped calling altogether. At work, I could feel the unspoken question hanging in the air. Is she okay? I began doubting myself in ways I never had before. Maybe I really was overreacting. Maybe I had lost perspective. Maybe 12 years of marriage had simply expired, and I was clinging to a version of us that no longer existed. One evening, I stood alone in our bedroom, staring at our reflection in the mirror. I looked tired, older, smaller. I thought about my parents' divorce, the way my mother had folded inward afterward, apologizing for taking up space, for wanting too much. I had promised myself I would never become that woman. And yet, there I was, shrinking. That night, lying awake beside Evan, I reached a terrifying conclusion. If I did nothing, this version of the story would become the truth. I would be the unstable wife, the jealous executive, the woman who lost it when her husband outgrew her. And Evan would walk away clean. That realization hurt, but it also clarified something. This was as low as I could go, which meant there was nowhere left but up. Clarity doesn't arrive with comfort. It arrives with resolve. The night after I finally admitted I was being slowly erased, I stopped asking myself why Evan had changed and started asking how he thought this would end. Because people who believe they're untouchable always make the same mistake. They underestimate silence. I reviewed everything I had collected, not emotionally, but strategically. Messages, timelines, patterns. The correlation between Evan's behavior and Camilla Walsh's rise within Patterson. The ethics policies I knew by heart from years inside corporate systems. No dramatics, no confrontation, just facts. And the facts were damning. Executive-subordinate relationships were explicitly prohibited. Retaliation using corporate resources was grounds for immediate termination. Misuse of company systems, especially for personal vendettas, was a career-ending offense. This wasn't about morality anymore. It was about liability. That realization shifted something fundamental inside me. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't reacting emotionally. I was standing on solid ground, and Evan was standing on a structure built entirely on secrecy. The turning point came not from a new discovery, but from a reframing of everything I already knew. I stopped thinking like a wife. I started thinking like a strategist. I began separating myself emotionally from the marriage, not in bitterness, but in preparation. I secured my accounts, backed up my data, created independent communication channels. I documented every retaliatory move quietly, meticulously. At the same time, I became perfect at home, calm, supportive, unquestioning. Evan relaxed. He thought the pressure had broken me. That was his final miscalculation. Because while he believed he was regaining control, I was removing myself from his narrative entirely. I also stopped trying to clear my name socially. People who doubt you don't need convincing. They need time and truth. And truth, I had learned, has an expiration date on lies. When the opportunity finally presented itself, when Evan casually mentioned an upcoming corporate event, dismissing it as another boring gala, I recognized it instantly. This wasn't just a public space. It was a stage, a place governed by rules, witnesses, and reputations that mattered more than personal comfort. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt focused. I knew exactly what I was going to do. Not to humiliate, not to explode, not to beg, but to step into his world calmly, visibly, and undeniably, and let the structure fail under its own weight. The fallout didn't explode. It cascaded. Slow at first, then all at once. Once the internal reviews began at Patterson Global, everything Evan and Camilla had relied on, plausible deniability, controlled narratives, quiet influence, started collapsing under scrutiny. I wasn't present for most of it, and that was intentional. When power structures fail, they don't need an audience. They need light. Camilla was the first to fall. Her confidence evaporated quickly once ethics committees stopped asking if something had happened and started asking how long. The evidence spoke without emotion. Timestamps, corporate access logs, financial irregularities tied to retaliation. By the time security escorted her out of the building, her reputation had already been stripped clean. No dramatic confrontation, no shouting, just a box of personal items and the weight of finality. Evan tried to control the narrative right up until the end. He told friends I had misinterpreted things, that stress had made me unstable, that corporate politics had unfairly targeted him. But stories don't survive contact with documentation. As investigations widened, the version of events he'd been feeding everyone stopped holding together. People noticed inconsistencies, timelines that didn't align, defensiveness where clarity should have been. And quietly, very quietly, support evaporated. His family stopped calling me, but they stopped calling him too. Friends who had once nodded along began asking questions he couldn't answer. At home, the atmosphere shifted from hostility to something far more unsettling: fear. Evan watched me differently now, measuring his words, avoiding my eyes. He knew I wasn't reacting, but he didn't know what I had already done or what else might surface. That uncertainty terrified him. One evening, he finally broke. "You planned this," he said, voice tight. "You waited until it would hurt the most." I looked at him calmly. "I didn't plan to be betrayed," I replied. "I planned to protect myself." He had no response. The marriage ended without drama. No screaming matches, no courtroom spectacle, just paperwork, negotiations, and a clean division of what remained. I left the house we once shared without ceremony. No backward glance, no speech. I didn't need closure from him. The truth had already closed the door. What surprised me most wasn't his downfall. It was how little satisfaction I felt watching it happen. Because by then, I was already gone. Healing didn't arrive as relief. It arrived as quiet. The kind of quiet that settles in after the noise finally stops. After explanations are no longer demanded. After vigilance is no longer required. After the weight you didn't realize you were carrying is set down for good. I moved into a smaller place. Nothing extravagant. Clean lines. Open light. A space that felt like mine rather than a compromise. For the first time in years, I slept through the night without waking to check a phone that wasn't ringing. Work stabilized, then flourished. Without the constant background hum of suspicion and emotional labor, my focus sharpened. Projects that once felt draining felt purposeful again. Colleagues stopped watching me carefully and returned to treating me like the professional I had always been. I didn't rush to replace what I'd lost. I rebuilt instead. Slowly. Deliberately. I learned something crucial during that year. Betrayal doesn't just come from infidelity. It comes from erasure, from being slowly reframed as inconvenient, from having your reality questioned until you doubt your own perceptions, from being asked to shrink so someone else can expand. I also learned that strength doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like restraint, preparation, patience. Survival, I discovered, is often strategic. I stopped monitoring the past when I realized it no longer had leverage over me. The lessons remained, but the vigilance faded. I didn't need to keep proving I was right. The outcomes had already done that. Looking back now, I don't feel bitterness. I feel clarity. I know what loyalty looks like. I know what respect requires. And I know that love built on secrecy will always collapse under scrutiny. Some people might say I was cold, calculated. Maybe I was, but I wasn't seeking revenge. I was seeking consequences, protection, and the chance to build something honest again, starting with myself. I'm an architect by nature, and if there's one thing I know for certain, it's this. Structures fail when their foundations are compromised, but when you rebuild on truth, carefully, intentionally, you don't just recover, you create something stronger than what existed before. And this time, I know exactly what I'm building.